Let's learn how rounding works in JavaScript. So go ahead and create a brand new file in your Visual Code, Visual Studio Code, and I saved mine as rounding.html. And then go ahead and type in just the basic structure of an HTML file. Now what we're going to do with rounding is there's different ways we can implement that in JavaScript. And the first way we can do that is through the round method. Now the thing about the round method is all you do is you pass it the number and then it returns it as a whole number to the nearest integer. So it doesn't do anything really with showing decimals or rounding decimals. It just says what's the number, bring back the whole number. So for instance, if you had the number 10.49, round would return 10. If you had 10.51, round would return 11. Another way that we can do rounding is with the toFixed method. You'd have like some number dot toFixed, and then you'd specify the number of decimals that you want to return. And this will try to round to the nearest decimal. And then the last way I'm going to show you is we're just going to write a little method that we have out there, our own little function, and it might be a little bit more accurate than others. So let's do the following. Let's go ahead and add some content to the body of our HTML page. And I'm just going to paste it in, and then you can pause the video and go and type it in. And so let's understand what I've done. First of all, I did a label tag, and I said for the ID text number, which is this input right here, the label is enter a number to round. Now I could have just typed the value right there. I could have said enter a number to round, but this is a way you can see how a label tag can be used and how you can attach a label tag to a specific form control. And we attach it through the ID. Not the name, but the ID. So this says for the ID of text number, here's the label associated with it. And then I did an input and said it's a text input, and I gave it a name and a number, or an ID, sorry. And this will be where the user types in whatever number they want to round. And then I have two breaks, and then I do another label that says how many decimals. And here's another input, and we said the minimum number of decimals we will allow is 0, and the max will be 3. That's what we're looking for. And I could change that. I could get rid of the min and max on there. That's a way you could work with it. In fact, let's go ahead and we won't put any specifications on there. Actually, let's go ahead and leave min is equal to 0. So they at least don't put negative numbers in there. And there's the label for it, and there's two breaks, and then I did a radio button group. Now the way you do a radio button group is you specify the input type is radio, but you give them all the same name, but then give them different IDs. And so this means that these are going to be part of a radio button group, meaning they're mutually exclusive. Only one of them can be checked at any one time, and that's because they're all part of this group. Now the difference between a radio button and a checkbox is you could have multiple checkboxes checked at any one time, but in a radio button group only one radio button can be checked. And I said this radio button has the ID of RB round, its value is round, and it's the default checked, and there's the text that will display for the radio button. The next radio button's ID is RB fixed, there's its value, there's its text. The next one is RB new round, there's its value, and there's its text. And then we have two breaks and another button, and this button says if you ever click on the button, go find a function called calc now, and there's the text that shows up on the button, and then two more breaks, and then a p tag with the ID of output, and that's where we will dynamically display our output. Now that we have our HTML all set up, let's go ahead and go do our JavaScript tags. and we will write our JavaScript function for the calc now. And I just pasted mine in, and so you can go ahead and pause the video, and you can go ahead and type this code in, and then we'll go through it and understand it. So now that you have time to type it all in, let's see what happens. First of all, when we click on this button for calculate, we're going to go find the function calc now. This is the function that we just wrote. In the calc now function, we have 4 variables that we've declared. The first variable, fNumber, says go out to the object text number, or go find an object in the DOM that has the ID of text number, which is our first input, grab its value and turn it into a float. And so whatever number they type in, 10.45, we will turn that into a float and store it to that variable. Then we go to the next input, or the next object, that has the ID of text decimals. That's the one that says how many decimals do you want to work with. And then we turn that into an integer and store it to that variable. And then I have 2 more variables that I use that we'll see in just a little bit, but soutput will be the output we generate and assign to the p tag. And inumRound will be the number of that we use in our mathematical function to do rounding. We drop into the document and say if the RBRound object is checked. Now remember, RBRound, that was one of our radio buttons. It's this first one right here. If it's checked, then we know we want to just use the round method. So we say fNumber is equal to math.round fNumber. Now remember, what the round does is it simply says go to the nearest whole number and remove all the decimals. So we go to the nearest whole number, and then we assign that number and this string, we concatenate it, to the variable soutput. If instead of having the RBRound checked, they had the RBFix checked, then we are going to go ahead and say take the number, turn it to fixed with a certain number of decimals they typed in, however number of decimals they wanted to do. By the way, be aware that the toFixed method turns the data into a string. So if you wanted to do anything else with this number, any type of mathematical equations, you'd need to do a parse int or a parse float on that value. But we're just going to leave it as a string because we then concatenate it with this message, which says the toFixed turns the value into a string and rounds to the decimal. If they didn't do the round and they didn't do the fixed, then we're going to do our own code. And what we do in our own code is we say take the number 1, it's a string, and concatenate it with 0 and repeat zeros for a certain number of decimals. So if they said they wanted 3 decimals, we would add 3 more zeros, and we'll see this when we actually run it. So this is give us a number we want to work with. We turn it into a float. We didn't really have to make a float. We could make it an int. And then we say our number is going to be equal to the mathRound function. But before we do the mathRound, we're going to take our number and multiply it by some big number here, 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. And then we will divide that number by the same number of zeros, and we'll see what that does for us. So let's go ahead and just run this and see what happens, and then we'll come back and we'll look at all the code again and make sure we understand. So make sure you save it and go ahead and run that in a browser. Now remember, in earlier videos we showed you how to add a third-party live share so we could go live. And so we're going to see this in the browser. Enter a number to browse, or to round. 10.45. How many decimals? I want 1 decimal. Currently the round is clicked, but remember, it really doesn't matter what I type in there if I do the round because it cuts it off. And it says 10.45 rounded returns the value of 10. So working with the round function, it doesn't really matter how many decimals I say. It's always going to return a whole number. Now what if I said 10.51? Remember, that number doesn't matter. I could put 0. It didn't matter. That now returns 11. So what happens is the round function looks at the decimal and then tries to get to the closest number. What if I said 10.499999 whatever? Still 10. What if I said 10.5? Now 11. So the round number takes a look at the decimal and then just says get to the nearest whole number. What if we did the following? Let's do 2 fixed. Let's go back to 10.4, we'll do 46. And then make sure you click on the 2 fixed method, and let's go to a decimal 1, 10.5. So in this case, using the 2 fixed instead of the round, that says we want 1 decimal, so take a look at the next one and see if it's 5 or greater. What if I did 10.4421? What if I said 10.46 to 2? What if I had 10.465 and I wanted 2 decimals? It still remains 10.46. And that's because it's simply saying, well, you might be a 5, but I'm really not greater, so I'm not going to move further up. What if we try our new rounding function with 10.46? Now it says 10.47. If we went to 1 decimal, 10.5. If we did 2 fixed on 1 decimal, 10.5. So you can see that maybe there's something going on with the 2 fixed versus our new rounding function, but it all depends on the level of accuracy you want to get to with that last decimal digit. So how is this actually working inside? Let's go take a look at the code. On this new method, let's go ahead and understand the code by running it through the debugger. We're still over here. We're running it. Press Control-Shift-I, and let's take a look at your code. If you don't see your code under the console, we also have source. And if you didn't see it under source, but you might see the file over here on the right, just click on that, and it will still take you to source. Some of this gets added in. Notice it says code injected by live server. That's because we're doing a live server. And now we can come up here and take a look at our JavaScript code, and we can do what they call setting a breakpoint. And what we do is we just click on one of those numbers and a blue line appears. And this now says that when we run this program, we are going to wait for the computer to indicate to us we have to decide what we want to do in the program. In other words, we are going to debug this code. We are going to run it step by step to determine what we want to do. Let's come over here and let's just click the new rounding function. We'll leave that data, click calculate. It then says, when you click calculate, go to the on-click event, call the calc now function. The calc now function comes up here and it says, hey, we have a breakpoint right there. And so we have paused the running of this code in the debugger. Now what I can do over here is I can use these buttons to tell the computer how I want to run this code. This simply says just run it. Just go ahead and keep running. This one says jump over until you have a function call, like another function that you wrote. We only have one function, so that's not going to help us. If we did, this would then run until we have our next function call and then wait for us. This says go ahead and run the rest of this function until you hit the end. This says just step through line by line, the F9. So let's go ahead and do that. F9. We now executed this line of code. Notice that F number has a value of 10.465. Currently idecimals is undefined. F9, or click on that button. Idecimals now has a value of 2. And it got that from this text box. Now it's waiting to execute this line to see whether or not that element RBRound checked is equal to a true or false. And let's see. So right here, it's going to determine whether or not it's true or false. I highlighted that expression. Notice it tells you what its value is. It's a false. So let's see if I click F9 or this button if it steps over it, which it does. Let's check this value. It's false. So let's see if it steps over it. And it does. So now we say, let's go and grab 1, the string 1, concatenate it with the 0, and let's repeat the total number of decimals. So we said 2 decimals. So let's see what it does for that number. It now says 1 with 2 zeros. How do we use that number? We say, take the number that we have in the text box and multiply it by the number that we just generated. So let's see what that will become. 1046.5. Then it says we need to do a round on that number. So let's see what happens if we do a math round on it. 1047. And then we need to divide by the total number that we worked with in the beginning, which is iRound. So by the time we're done, it should be 10.47. So that's what we're using this numRound for. Usually it'd be like times 10, times 100, times 1,000. But I didn't want to hard code that. So I'm just letting the system create the number for me based upon the number of decimals that I wanted to do. If I said I only wanted 1 decimal, then this would be 10. 2 decimals, 100. 3 decimals, 1,000. And I would use that number in this expression to try to work with the rounding of that number. Let's click this button and just run it. There's our 10.47. Let's try 1, if we just did a 1. Now remember, round would just cut this off to the nearest number. 2 fixed. Let's see what 2 fixed would do on that. And let's go ahead. I'm just going to run through that function. 2 fixed is 10.5. What would the new rounding function do for us? New rounding, we come into here. Let's set another breakpoint right there. Click this button and it will run until it hits the next breakpoint. Currently, we need to generate this number. We said we want 1 decimal. Click on the F9. So the number we're going to work with is 10. We take that number, multiply it by 10, round it, and then divide by 10 again to get our new number. And 10.5. So there are 3 different ways that you can do rounding now, using the round method, the 2 fixed method, or our own code. By the way, if you want to remove these breakpoints, just click on that, and the breakpoints are removed, and now we can do whatever we want. There's a big number. Let's round it to 4 decimals. 10.4659. What if this was an 8? Same value. What if we did a 2 fixed on it? Same value. But there are some numbers that will act differently with the 2 fixed and the round and this new rounding function. So play with those, try some numbers out, and have some fun. Where you will really see the difference is if you try a number like 10.45. Watch what happens if I do a round, 10. A 2 fixed, 10.4. The new rounding function, 10.5. Because maybe what it does is it says, it takes a look at 1 and says, hey, is the next number 5 or greater? If so, we should go ahead and increase this. Whereas the round, the 2 fixed method just simply said, you know what, that's still 10.4. You'll have to decide if that's an error or not an error with 2 fixed compared to new rounding. Anyway, have fun.